Okay, we're good.
Hi, this is John Sarver. Welcome to our fifth installment in the Michigan Solar Story series that's sponsored by the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association and the Michigan Solar Users Network. And tonight we have Murray Rosenthal and David Lewis, who are going to talk to us about the House of Worship, this House of Worship in Ann Arbor, the Genesis, about the 64 kilowatt project they did, and particularly about the investor model that they used to finance it. And so I'd ask you please to mute yourself until we get to the question and answer period. And with that, Murray, why don't you tell us your story?
All right. So the title is How to Solarize Your House of Worship. And it's being given by myself and David Lewis, and we're both with Genesis, which is a house of worship in Ann Arbor, and we'll tell you a little bit more about Genesis later. So what I want you to do is to go up to the leaders in your house of worship, or perhaps if you know of a nonprofit that you're involved with, and tell them, we can get solar installed on your building at no cost. You don't need any donations, no loans, only to pay us for the electricity we generate using this investor model. So what's in it for me? We're going to learn how to get solar on your house of worship. This talk's going to go about 20 minutes, and there's going to be 3 parts. The first part is what we did, and the second part is very important. It's why we did it, and I want to use a quote from that great American patriot, Jerry Garcia. Somebody has to do something about global warming. It's just incredibly pathetic that it has to be us. And the third part is how we did it. And that's the most important part, because that's the how-to that you can use to do it on your house of worship, condo association, or nonprofit. So this is what we did. So once upon a time, 2 houses of worship got together, this was about 40 years ago, and decided to share a building. Genesis of Ann Arbor. Genesis is the entity that oversees the building and nurtures the relationship between the 2 congregations. And the 2 congregations are St. Clair's Episcopal Church and Temple Beth Emeth. 2 different religions, same building. Temple uses it on Friday and Saturday, and the church uses it on Sunday. Also in the building, and we both maintain separate identities to worship, but we have a lot of the same values, and we have a lot of shared social activity also. Also, a 3rd congregation uses a building on Sunday. They rent the social hall, Blue Ocean Faith, and we have a preschool that meets in the building. So 4 institutions in one, we save energy right there. We didn't have to do anything, and we still were saving energy. About 5 years ago, we formed the Genesis Green Committee. David and I are on it. There's 4 or 5 members right now. And this is our motto, Genesis Greening, building to reduce carbon emissions altogether. That's a double entendre. And one thing about the Zoom platform, I can't hear you guys laugh. You guys got to laugh louder. I can't hear you.
Everyone's muted.
I know. All right. So I've got to minimize this so I can see. So what we did, 160 solar panels. We had 2 roofs, a flat roof on the left is the social hall roof, and a gabled slanted roof on the right, the office roof. 80 panels. Oh, I'm getting reverb, sorry. 80 panels on each, 64 kilowatts, 400 watts per panel. It's going to generate about 31% of our consumed power when the building is occupied. Right now, it's not. We're putting power back on the grid right now. Went live on February 4th. Here's some pictures. The left is the office roof, or the center is the social hall. You notice we didn't have to drill any holes or screw anything down. They're weighted down with concrete blocks, so they're removable. And on the right, that's our typical generation, I think the month after this first started producing electricity. Solar panel installations cost money. Houses of worship, nonprofits, condo associations, they don't have a lot of money. So our green team considered many, many ways of funding solar. We first thought the loan was the way to go, but we couldn't even approach our board to buy in on that. Could do a capital campaign, we could ask for donations, but what we finally decided on was an investors group. And I think if you start this, you'll gain momentum and it'll finish. I think you'll have fantastic luck doing this and fantastic results. So why do we need an LLC? Nonprofits don't pay taxes, so they can't take advantage of the 30% federal tax credit that existed last year and it's gone down this year, and we'll talk about that, and also depreciation of the panels. So they can't take advantage of those two things that they would if you put them on your house. So this is our model. We formed an LLC called EASTOVER. They bought the panels and paid for the installation. They own the panels, Genesis agrees of having them on the roof and using the generated power. The investors will get a 30% tax credit this year because construction started last year in December. And Genesis pays EASTOVER 11.5 cents per kilowatt, which is a little bit cheaper than the current rate of 12.5, which, as you all know, or you should know, DTE just raised the rates this month. So it's going to go up from 12.5. So 20 congregants got together to form EASTOVER LLC, and the cost of our system was $120,000. And I wanted to talk about why we call it EASTOVER. Well, you can see this is a picture of our building before the solar panels, and it's located on the corner of Packard Street and Eastover Place in Ann Arbor. And you can see at the top there's EASTOVER. It's labeled. But we didn't call it EASTOVER because we're located on Eastover. We called it EASTOVER because, like Genesis, it's a contraction, Easter and Passover. Okay, why we did it, part 2. Global warming, it's a problem, everybody knows. Why specifically us? We want to help the global warming problem, reduce the carbon footprint for the building. It has long-term energy savings for the building, and it increases the property value of the building. Now, David and I, for these 5 years we've been on the green team, and the entire green team thought this was a good idea, whether or not there was payback. I mean, global warming is an issue, and if we don't take action, who will? If a house of worship doesn't. So now you'll see in our front of our Genesis buildings, we have this small, very old 150-year-old building where we have a food pantry. We feed about 160 people each week, give them free food. There's no financial payback for that, right? But we do it anyways because it's the right thing to do, and so are solar panels. How we did it. So this is the important part. If we could do it, you could do it. We had many, many more obstacles than you could even think of, being the fact that we have a partnership. So this is the investor model, house of worship investor model. So this is the tax credits. You can see that they're disappearing. They shouldn't be disappearing. You should call your congressman and tell them they shouldn't be disappearing. But they're 26% if you start a project this year. Next year, it'll be 22, and after that, 10, and it's only for commercial. So you need to do this soon. So first step, and there's 18 steps. I'm going to go over the first step in detail. The other 18 I'm going to breeze through in the interest of time. So the first step is talk to the leaders, the clergy, the lay leaders, the elders, whoever's in charge, in general terms about your idea. Tell them, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. Get some initial buy-in. Tell them it's not going to cost you anything. Tell them about similar success stories, and I've got some examples of those later in the presentation. Oh, it's right here. So these are 6 houses of worship in Southeast Michigan that have done this, used the investor model. And by far, Genesis has had the most investors, 20. Some of them only had 1. Some of them used congregants. Some of them didn't. One of them used an outside person who invested the money. So on all these 6 buildings, there are 489 panels with an investment of $403,000. So if you need to, invite one of us, David or I, or one of the other houses of worship leaders, and then we have a list of them, who has done this on his and her building. Tell them how easy it is. Tell your leaders that this is just an idea for now, just for explore, they're not making a commitment. And then ask for the permission to proceed. Can we look at forming an investment group? And they're going to say yes. Now, Genesis had a caveat. They didn't want this open to Bill Gates to buy the panels or someone with deep pockets. They wanted the members. So we had to form the investment group of the members of both congregations, and we did that. But you don't have to. You can ask Bill Gates or someone else who has a lot of money. And so step 1 is done. Steps 2 to 18 are next. As I said, I cover step 1 in detail. I'm going to breeze through the other 17 steps, but you don't have to worry. There's a document that we will be glad to send you that details each of the 18 steps. So the first step, form a green team if you don't have one. Hold a meeting and assign action items for the next few steps. The third step is to count your roofs. You want to use a south-facing roof, if possible, if it's a gabled roof, or a flat roof. A lot of churches have flat roofs. And you need to know what your energy usage is. So you need to look at your bills for the last couple of years, and you can get those from DTE or your electric provider. You have to make sure your roofs are in good shape. You don't want to put solar panels on a roof and then a few years later have to replace it. So we had to do that on our office roof. It needed replaced. It was replaced a few weeks before the solar installation started. Get quotes. We got 4 quotes. I think you should get at least 3. We found that the quotes were pretty similar, except for Homeland, which was quite a bit cheaper than the others. So we went with them after we checked their references, and they're very reputable. And let's shoot for the moon. Let's try to cover our roofs with solar panels like we did at Genesis. We put them in just about every place we could. But your solar installer can help you with that. You don't want to generate so much electricity that you're putting a lot back on the grid. So we're at about 31%. So we feel that's a sweet spot for our building. And we will put a little bit back on the grid, but not a lot when the building's at full use. So your solar installers will let you know how many panels, and they'll give you all the numbers, and they'll make recommendations. Step 5, state your intention to the board to find investors and ask them if you're allowed, and they'll say yes. Then you have to communicate. So you may have just one investor in mind and you can skip this step. Maybe it's you, maybe it's someone else, but I recommend you find investors because I think the more the merrier. It's quite one thing for one person to invest $120,000 in an altruistic investment, but if you can find 20 people to share the burden, it's not so bad. Hold an investor meeting and provide the details. And stress is an altruistic investment. Now, they will make money on this a little bit, probably going out 15, 20 years, they will start to see some returns on their investment. They're not going to lose money. And it's a win-win situation. It's a win-win agreement between the investor group and the house of worship. And they will get that 30% of their money back this year or next year on taxes. Or 26 it is right now, I'm sorry, 26. So you need to have a legal agreement between the LLC and the PPA and the house of worship. It's called a power purchase agreement, a PPA. It's a long-term win-win agreement, covers all the details. Provide the details to the interested potential investors. In our case, we decided the minimum investment was $5,000. That's what most of the 20 people put in was $5,000, but some put in 10 or 15,000 or even 20. Then you analyze all this, and we have a lady that works with Solar Faithful. Her name is Diane Cheklich, and she has this energy data tool base, and she can run the numbers over the 20 years. And that's what we used to create the power purchase agreement. You need to set up the LLC. It costs $50 in the state of Michigan. You need a federal tax ID number. You apply to the IRS for that. You create an LLC operating agreement. This is the operating agreement that says how your limited liability corporation is going to work. Who's the officer, how the officers are elected, what happens if someone leaves or God forbid passes away, what happens to their share of ownership. There are 3 documents from available from Solar Faithful, their templates. One is the PPA, one is the agreement to set up the LLC we just talked about, and the third is an agreement with the installer. But the installer, he'll probably have his own agreement. You may not need that third one. Step 11, have the investor sign a subscription agreement, just a one-page form saying, hey, I'm committing to giving you $5,000 for this LLC to buy the panels. Have them sign it. And you open a bank account. You select an installer from your many quotes, and you finalize the power purchase agreement. So this is the big table. It's the appendix to the PPA. And at the end, you'll see that we're charging Genesis the same amount for electricity. We're not like DTE. We don't raise the rates every year. So that probably 10 years from now, we'll be paying twice to DTE what we're paying for the solar. And the estimated system production, it goes down about 0.5% a year, just because the panels age. And the estimated monthly solar payment to the LLC. And the SLV amount, that's due to the value, because you can always, there's an option in the PPA that the house of worship can buy the panels back at any time after 5 years, because the government requires 5 years of LLC operation to get the credit. So after 5 years, they can buy it back at any time. And then you have to finalize the power purchase agreement. In our case, we had to get the approval of 5 different entities, 5. You won't, you'll probably have 1. The Genesis Board, the Temple Beth Emeth Board, the St. Clair's Vestry, the Episcopal Diocese of Michigan, and St. Clair's had to have a congregational vote. That took a while, but only 2 or 3 months, not horrible. You need to decide on insurance. Typically, it's going to be cheaper for the panels to be covered by the House of Worship's insurance. You need to select an accountant, tax preparer, and then you have to schedule the installation. Once you do that, you sit back and relax and let the installer do all the work. There will be some decisions like where to run the wires and things, but that should be a pretty easy thing to decide. Don't forget, patience is a virtue. We had ours installed starting in December. The weather wasn't too good. It took a long time. And of course, the utility drags their feet starting it up because they're still selling you electricity. There's nothing in it for them to start your system, but they'll get to it eventually. This is what an app that we have, Solar Edge, that our installer provided, and it gives you minute by minute generation of your system. At this point, we were generating 456 watts, and you can see some days are less sunny and we generate less, and some days we generate a lot. We've been generating a lot of power. It's fun to watch. And you can actually look at each panel. You can see each panel, the power generated. And at first we had 2 panels on the office roof that were kind of misbehaving. I believe they've been fixed by our installer. So there were 3 parts to our presentation. We covered them. Let's do this. Let's decide. Let's commit. Let's succeed in getting those panels on our condo association, our house of worship, or our nonprofit that we decide is our target. Why not target 2? We will help you. Here's some resources. As I mentioned, the document on how to, which covers all the details. Solar Faithful, an organization in Ann Arbor, Michigan Interfaith Power and Light. Fellow congregants will help. And you have your Faith Upline to help. So those people in the national organization, they will love the fact that you're trying to put solar panels on your building. We love to present. Just ask us in person or via Zoom, hopefully in person, because then I can hear you laugh. Communication. We have answers to your questions, and if we don't, we'll find out. We'll find them. Your installers are a great source of information. I'd ask them first. And also there are government resources. The city of Ann Arbor has committed to becoming carbon neutral by the year 2030. That's less than 10 years from now. And this is part of their program, Houses of Worship and Solar. So it's time for questions, but before we get into those, I wanted to mention that this same information, along with several other of the houses of worship and nonprofits that I showed you on that one busy slide, will be presented on Sunday, this Sunday at 1 to 3:30 p.m. via Zoom. And you should have received an invitation to that with your invitation to this meeting. If you didn't, you can call or email me. My number is listed there. My cell phone, 734-864-6750. Just text me. All right, questions. And I'm gonna let David handle the questions.
So I'm unmuting everybody. So if it doesn't get too chaotic, if just speak up state your name and your question, and we will answer it best we can. If it starts getting a bit too chaotic, we might just switch to questions via chat. There, let me just first, before we go to any verbal questions, there's one question on the chat from Mindy. Do you feel there was a big advantage to form your own LLC rather than hire a company who does that? Yeah, we felt like there was several advantages for us to have a kind of an in-house, so to speak, LLC. One of the advantages was unlike a third-party LLC who would be doing this in order to make money, the congregants, making money wasn't really the goal. Our goal was to save the congregation's money by, allowing the house of worship to benefit from the tax credit. So we are charging, in my mind, a very generous rate when we sell the electricity to the house of worship. Just again, we're not looking to make money. And then the other reason we want to do it, and it was just not having a kind of outside group having any sort of, say or involvement with something that was pretty intimate for the house of worship. So the fact that the LLC is made up of congregants, we kind of feel like even, legally, technically it's a third party, but in reality, it's kind of, we're all the same people, which we are, expecting that to just have everything work smoother that way. Anyone else have a question, to speak up?
Okay, I have a question. This is Charles Morris. Does the LLC model, let's say if a congregate wanted to put solar on their home, would there be a way that model within the LLC, if it's still in operation, could that be adapted to congregate residential?
Well,
that way?
there's no reason you would want an LLC for residential installation, because the homeowner, if it's a traditional residential situation where you have a homeowner who owns the house, lives in the house, they can take advantage of the tax credit themselves. The only reason this LLC model exists is because of the house of worship is not able to take advantage of the tax credit. So there's really no reason you would do it for a single family home. It does exist. There are third parties out there who will pay for panels to be installed on people's homes, but I haven't really looked into it. But I've been, what I've read is that it's not done much, and it's really not necessarily a good idea.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question. Well, a couple questions. First of all, are you able to use the what's left of the net metering from the utility company, or does that not apply to you?
Yeah, it does not. I'm not sure exactly when it ended, but we missed that opportunity. We were after the rules changed. So we get, for all the power that our system puts on the grid, DTE pays the house of worship money for that electricity, but where they charge, the 12.5 cents for the electricity that they provide the house of worship, they only pay, 7.5 cents for the power that they buy from the house of worship. So it's a pretty substantial difference, but it's still, at least you're getting 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour.
Okay, and my other question is, so the investors in the LLC, they take their share of the 30% and apply it against their personal income from other sources?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And I want to say it's a credit. It's not a deduction, it's a credit.
And it applies for the calendar year that the system gets turned on. So the way the rules work, so because we started construction in 2019, that locked us into the 2019 tax credit of 30%. And then you have a window, I forget how, it's like a 2 or 3 year window you have to complete construction and turn on the system. And then you get the credit the calendar year that the system is turned on. So since our system was turned on in February of 2020, the investors that tax credit will apply to our 2020 taxes. Who else?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You pay your utility bill monthly to the investors, is that correct?
So, yeah, so now the house of worship currently gets 2 bills because the system does not provide all the electricity the building uses. So the house of worship is still purchasing electricity from DTE, but less than they used to. So they still get their monthly bill from DTE, and the LLC, we're sending the house of worship a bill just quarterly to keep our paperwork more, to keep the paperwork less. So we're sending a bill to the house of worship quarterly. So the house of worship now is paying, basically they have now 2 different providers for their electricity.
Thank you.
Marie, David Arnosti here. In discussing the program and setting it up, Did you think about larger social impacts, the way that deploying renewable energy could help people who are in low resource, low income communities?
We have talked, I'm not sure if I understand your question exactly, but we have talked with the Michigan Interfaith Power and Light group and Solar Faithful group, the idea of maybe providing this kind of model with in some communities, you know, they're at the house of worship in certain communities that don't have the resources to come up with investors. So we have talked about it. It seems like, you know, when we start getting to the nitty gritty, it gets complicated pretty quickly. But in theory, it seems like you could present this idea to a house of worship and say, hey, you know, we have this group of investors already created. We would love to help you guys get solar panels on your roof, and here's, you know, how it could work. And it's in theory, it should be pretty easy. It's just some of the details get a little complicated. So it would be wonderful to make that happen. It's a question of someone taking on the task.
And I do want to say, and for instance, Diane Cheklich who's also on the call, and I mentioned her in my presentation. We're starting to work with a church in Detroit. It's a church mainly with Black people, and they're very poor, but they're considering using this model. I have had 2 other houses of worship express an interest in the last couple of weeks. And also a condo association here in Ann Arbor is starting to use this model. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. I live in a suburban development. I mean, we could do it here. We could pick a field or pick everybody's roofs and tie the solar all together in the condo association and share the power.
So that leads into a question. This is John Gorley talking. I was wondering if we could adapt this to a neighborhood. And I was also curious about more specific details on how the investors get a return on their investment. You know, if I put in $5,000, do I get interest, so to speak, dividends on that money? Is it paid back as if it were a loan, or how does that work?
Let me address your second question first, just because
Okay.
I know the answer to that one better. So basically, so every investor invests their whatever portion that they're wanting to invest. Like Murray mentioned, our group, we had a $5,000 minimum. And with $1,000 increments above that for any, you know, no maximum. And then basically the LLC then collects the money that the house of worship pays us for our electricity. And then we'll divvy that up amongst the investors proportionate to, you know, the percentage that they own based on their initial investment. So, and then our plan, is to sell the panels back to the house of worship after 5 years. And we basically have the agreement in place is basically anywhere from year 5 or technically year 6 to year 20, the house of worship can buy the panels. And every year the price goes down a little bit to the point where after 20 years, it's free. We're basically just donating the panels to the house of worship after 20 years. So every year for the first 5 years, so the first way the investors get their, you know, return is the tax credit. So if you invested $5,000 at 30% right off the top, you get $1,500 back in tax credit, and then every year you'll collect money from the payments that the house worship makes for the electricity you're providing them. And then, like in our case, when you're after 5 or 6 years, we sell the panels, And again, the power purchase agreement has that price for, you know, the exact price that we will sell the panels for, depending on what year it is. And that money gets distributed to all the investors. So in the end, we're expecting to earn maybe like 1 or 2% on our money. The goal was to not lose money and not simply break out even, but our goal was just to make like 1 or 2%, just to, you know, again, none of us, the idea it was going to be easier to find investors if it wasn't like, oh, you know, you're going to lose money by doing this. But we made it clear to everybody up front, you know, this isn't something to do if you're looking to earn money, you know, it's more, you're doing more for altruistic purposes.
That's 1 to 2% per year, David, right? 1 to 2%.
Oh, 1 or 2%, I think, total.
Oh, total, okay.
Or is it 1 or 2%? I honestly, Murray, I don't remember if it was per year or total. I want to say it was total, but it may be.
So the
Also hard to predict because the electricity that gets produced every year is, you know, it's kind of a function of the weather and the clouds. So you don't really know what your income is going to be. And then let me just answer your first question real quickly. And there might be some other people on this Zoom meeting that know better than I do. I believe there are groups that are petitioning the state right now to allow for neighborhood solar that you can share. You know, a group of individuals can get together, pay for a single installation that would then generate power for several houses. But as far as I understand, I don't think that's legal right now.
Well, let's see, Dr. Ron wrote in the chat, there's a web link for Ann Arbor Neighborhood Squad.
Oh, I'll just say that right now that's simply an idea. I'm recovering from a serious spinal cord injury. I approached St. Thomas Church last summer, but nothing has happened since then, and I'm finally getting better enough that I want to follow up on it. So I was really excited to, you know, hear about this project. My cousin got married at that church maybe 20 years ago, so I'm familiar with it. I recently came back from 10 years in New York City, and there Brooklyn Microgrid has neighbors selling electricity to other neighbors who don't have solar on their roof or small businesses. And I've got a collection of videos, which if you go to that link, it was originally a private group that I put up there, and I had posted a bunch of videos, and apparently they've somehow not remained viewable to the public. But if you register for the site and join the group, which is a public group, then you'll be able to see that. And this is a website with a small number of members. We only started a couple of months ago. But before my accident, my wife and I did web development in New York City for 10 years.
Yeah, let me address one issue too. Community solar legislation has been introduced in the Michigan legislature. Right now, for practical purposes, really just utilities can do community solar projects, because the issue, of course, gets into how do you get a bill credit if the utility's not cooperating. Well, this community solar legislation basically would allow nonprofit groups and cities and private developers to basically do community solar projects, and it would basically require the utilities to then use bill credits related to that community solar project, because that's been the big roadblock is how do you get the bill credits to the subscribers. Needless to say, it's not, that legislation is not a favorite of our utilities, and there's strong opposition to it. That doesn't mean it's not, it means it's, I wouldn't bet a lot of money on it passing, But I think it's important that the legislation was introduced and that, you know, maybe I'll be wrong, or maybe down the road something like that would be passed, because I think it would be very helpful for kind of really neighborhood community solar projects. You know, it would just kind of open things up in a lot of very positive ways.
John, I'd be really interested in finding out from you, if you post on your website or email me, who's doing the activism around changing those laws. When I got the idea for this project, I anticipated that DTE would be a huge problem. And I was as interested in fighting that fight as trying to get solar for my house. My wife and I, when we were in New York City for 10 years, we were developers 1 and 2 for Occupy Wall Street, if that gives you an idea.
I'm a board member on the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association, and there's other organizations besides GLREA, but these sorts of legislation, the Community Solar Bill and the legislation related to reinstating net metering and eliminating the cap on net metering projects is all kind of on our list of priorities. There's other groups too. You know, almost all the environmental groups are kind of supportive of these legislations, and again, the GLREA is in the fight.
So
Do you have a bill number or sponsor?
I can't tell you offhand, but you know what you can do is you can, if you Google Michigan legislature, it basically brings you to a place where you can either put in a keyword or a bill number, and you put in community solar or whatever, and the bills will come up.
Hey, John, this is Diane Cheklich. I actually have some of those bills handy, so I am writing the bill number in the chat. If people want to look it up by bill number, you can do that. And this is an opportunity for everyone, and thank you, Dr. Ron, for your interest. It's an opportunity for all of us as constituents to add our voices to the support for those bills, because if we're all interested in promoting solar and we have these policy barriers in the way, it's important for us to let our representatives know what we would like and to help move the needle on these things, because I think that's helping to get it done. I went to one of the hearings before the pandemic hit, and it was standing room only with people there in support of some of these solar bills. So it can make a difference, and it's an easy thing to do to write your reps. Thank you.
And related to that, thank you, Diane. Actually, it's kind of a bipartisan effort. You know, there are Republican, actually very conservative Republicans who support solar bills because they see it as a electric choice issue, and that they're not really big on monopoly power. Of course, there's also a few legislators who are very friendly with the utilities. So, but there are both Republican and Democratic legislators who are supportive.
Dave Aronofsky, do you have a question?
I just wanted to make a point about the financial model. John Mirsky described the Ozone House project in Ann Arbor. So they have a PPA and set up very similar, and it is I think 2% return per year. And it's not there to make a lot of money, but the savings to Ozone House would be similar to what you've described. So you can kind of think of it as an ultra-conservative bond of some sort in terms of what kind of return you're going to get. And yes, it is mostly because that's what you want to do.
All right, I just wanted to mention a few more things. Now, Diane just spoke, and she's done this on a church in Ferndale. She's not a congregant there, so she's come in from the outside to do that. And she's also put an installation, or is in the process, on her condo to generate electricity for the common areas and also, I guess, for some of the occupants of the condo. So,
anyone else have a question or comment?
What was that?
What was that? I don't know. I also wanted to mention that there's a dividend to all this. Once your congregants learn how this works, they may go out and get solar panels on their own house. I know one of the investors in the PPA, he's a ophthalmologist, and he put solar panels on his office building.
On the other hand, when I put the solar panels on my house, although I wasn't too sure that I was convinced of the calculations, but they claimed that it was going to be an 8% ROI.
All right, if there's no more questions, I guess we'll wrap it up. We really appreciate, I guess David's got his hand up. We can take another question, but we really appreciate your attending tonight. And I hope you take some action on your target house of worship of choice and get some panels up there in the next year. David? Oh, you're just waving. All right. Bye.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Murray.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Appreciate the
Thank you everyone very much for attending tonight. Thank you.
appreciate
Thank
the
you,
info
Don,
for sure.
for doing this. Good night.